Welcome back to Side Quests IX, episode 17, Final Fantasy IX. Back with me, my constant companion and perennial party member, Wes Schantz. Wes, good to see you.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. And happy to see you on our regular day, close to our regular time, talking about our regular featured Final Fantasy IX, rather than
Yeah,
the newer age games that we've been talking about, like Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade or Expedition 33.
FF9. An old castle located in the northern area of the Forgotten Continent.
An old
That's where
castle
we're
and
at.
an inverted castle by some measures. One of the characters mentions, I think it was Zidane. This looks like an inverted castle, and there does seem to be an MC Escher element to it.
Yeah.
Upon reflection, that was a pretty good clue that there was something inverted, something fishy was going to happen. And then when I saw that the weapons I was getting were not like new versions of the first
Mm.
weapons, but were in fact the first weapons, like the broadsword and the dagger, I should have put it together that weapons values were inverted. But
Uh-huh.
instead, I just thought that maybe magic was strong and physical attacks were weak. I didn't put together the connection between what was said, the structure of the castle itself, and the actual structure of the mechanics of battle as well. That
Mm.
was all very parallel and put in line. And so aesthetically, I appreciate that now, having had two of my major damage dealers, Steiner and Zidane, who can regularly do like 2,000 damage, doing like 300 the entire time.
Yeah, this could be a pretty tough section of the game if you aren't aware of what's going on. And I agree that they give you a couple of kind of oblique hints, but it's never spelled out very clearly. Um, I, I don't know. I think that some magic, particularly like status effect magic, is also pretty handy here. Like a
Yeah.
lot of the enemies start using various kinds of like doom or uh, petrify, things like that.
Right.
And those work against them as well, right? So if you have learned some of those spells, you can use them to end some fights pretty quickly. Um, but yeah, if you just go kind of head on, this could be a pretty devastating section of the game.
Yes, and I wonder to what extent the palace feels itself vaguely reminiscent of Kuja's palace, but also of Ultimatia's, in that it is a very palacey palace, very archetypal, very gothic in its coloring of chiaroscuro, grayscale, and large columns and archways as well in the tradition of Gothic architecture, particularly in the opening area. It seems to be the floor seems to be some sort of marble, and the pillars themselves are the sort of pillar. I can't recall whether it's Doric or Ionic or Corinthian that are on the that are featured on the Acropolis, or sorry, on the in the Temple of Athena in Athens. And so this is a very interesting timelessy sort of place, with lots of natural light coming in these sort of stained glass stylized large windows, and 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 it has some connection to Terra, and here we also find a boss that mentions and knows its relationship to Terra, Taharka, like the Ifa tree, Soul Cage. Or I think the most recent boss that we fought also had some relation, but I'm forgetting which one it was. We also see these four mirrors, and then get to engage in sort of a Zelda, Ocarina of Time-esque uh, tromp around uh, four temples named for the four ancient Greek elements: air, earth, fire. Uh, Air may be called wind here, and earth, yeah, and what, yeah, air, earth, fire, water. Yes. And then we have to break our team, unfortunately, into four teams of two. And I have four very strong team members and then three or so not very strong ones. And go to these temples and fulfill their tasks. And then I think that gets us pretty close to or to Disc 4 and to this new planet, Terra.
Yeah, there's a very abbreviated dungeon sequence there, right? Because you drop off each of the party members and they've teamed up on their own. You don't actually get to choose that. Um, and none of them are playable except for uh, the Zidane Quina piece of the puzzle. And even that is like a single hallway, basically. It's a super short, and I don't know if these locations even existed prior to this sequence. Like if they did, they were latent or hidden or something. At any rate, inaccessible. Um, but you don't even need to land the airship. You just need to like get kind of close to them, and then there's a little cutscene where the two members of the party will be dispatched into that cave, that location. Uh, and then we sort of bounce back and forth between the duos, but only for really brief bits of dialogue. And although we see some of the other parties taking on the guardians of the different elements, it's not actual battles, right? Like you don't actually fight the bosses, except for again Zidane Quena against the Earth Guardian. Uh, I don't think there's any, at least for me, there weren't any random battles on the way through either. Um, there's not a save point, I don't think either. So that's probably a good thing because I think the last place that you could save was back in Ipsen's castle. Although I guess you could probably just save, you know, out on the world map, or if you had a side quest to do in between. Um, but it's a really strange way of approaching this like turning point in the game because you don't, have a, an actual playable segment here. It's almost reminiscent of stuff laid in Xenogears, where you're kind of like seeing the you know the action as a kind of cutscene and not actually playing it. I I don't know if that was because they were running out of time, if it's because they feel like the elemental thing has been done before in pretty much every Final Fantasy up to that point, um, or yeah, or what the intention was there. Um, but it felt pretty perfunctory. Um, it just, yeah, not a super compelling part of the quest to catch Kuja here. I don't know what you thought of the business with Amarant in Ibsen's castle, but that similarly was kind of like falling flat for me. Just like, okay, uh, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so
Thoughts
I
on
was
that?
actually going to lead with that and talk about this being a very weak attempt to use the vernacular, weak sauce attempt or tepid attempt, a lukewarm attempt at trying to develop Amarant at all, but it
Mhm.
just comes off as out of place. And even the other party members are like, what the hell is this coming from? Like, oh, all of a sudden you want to compete against the Dane in order to prove that going on your own is better than being a part of a group. And you beat him, but then all of a sudden you're injured and you need his help and you wonder why he's there to help you. And even then you still are like, is it just to make fun of me and mock me? And he just is so, seemingly autistic that he just doesn't understand basic human motivations. Even though Zenain is not a human, he does occupy a good human role, even as perhaps a Terran genome. And But that's not what makes him hard to understand to Amarant. It isn't something to do with him being Terran or having a tail. It's the fact that he cares about other people and cares about somebody based on the fact that they're part of a team, which actually scholars and many people today might consider a problematic aspect of Zidane, the fact that he cares so much about somebody just because they're on his team. And there may be outgroup issues that relate to that because of that, or prejudices that come about because of that way of looking at things. In any case, though, it is portrayed here as positive, a redeeming aspect of Zidane. Obviously, a big difference between him and Kuja, and again, illustrative of his unreflective nature. He just does it without thinking. Isn't this right? He says, sort of like Final Fantasy VII remake and the Avalanche members, Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, after their first mission, when they say, didn't we do the right thing? But he's a little firmer on this, but he's not going to reflect. He's very like Squall, Final Fantasy VIII's protagonist, and his trenchant ability to just kind of do what he thinks is right or what his orders are, as it were, and just move forward. But I thought it was misplaced. Came out of nowhere, added nothing to the narrative, and even worse, added nothing to Amarant. And I'll add one third damning point to my infernal trident here, which is that I think it was a pathetic attempt at making a new Shadow that fell even flatter, because Shadow I cared about. Shadow also turns out to have a really interesting connection to one of the most interesting characters, who's basically a wild savage because he was abandoned by his father out in these wild savage lands and has become a very unique sort of person because of that. Sort of like Ibn Baja's High Ibn Yaksan, who grew up outside of human communities. But that character is really cool, can actually die and leave the party, does leave the party randomly at some point. This is Shadow I'm talking about from Final Fantasy VI. And then again, has a very interesting relationship to one of the more minor protagonist playable characters, who is in fact the Blue Mage. But so all that goes to say is that I thought this was weak. I thought that this castle was itself like an imaginative duplication of Kuja's desert palace, not nearly as there. Where are all the colors? Again, this Gothic, it's black and white, it's chiaroscuro, but it's less vivid than where we just were in the desert palace, which has these traps, much more interesting traps too, not just like false trap doors. It has real stained glass all over, has all of this devil and evil god and angel imagery, and all three those three distinct statues. And it's also a very involved puzzle, whereas this is a very short puzzle leading to an even shorter one. So I think, right, in the same way that Amarant is a pale reflection of Shadow and is himself a pale reflection of an interesting character and is himself out of place in this moment, I do feel the difficulty of transition, like an EDM DJ who needs to switch between their set and the person after, and they have to have a smooth transition, right? They have to somehow go from one track to the other without it being noticeable, and they can do this poorly. And this, I think, is a poor transition. I think it is the reuse of a trope and the that's already been used better in the game more immediately, and and then the infusion of the least interesting character at a poor moment to infuse him, which also creates the unfortunate parallel in the negative for this character to Shadow from Final Fantasy VI. While also connecting this game simplistically to much simpler RPGs, which have more, like you said, 4 dungeon, 4 element structures. Get through these 4 game changes, particularly Zelda Ocarina of Time, which has the water temple, the fire temple, the earth temple, and I think the shadow temple. So slightly different in that respect, but
Well, yeah,
middling.
but in Majora's Mask, you've got that inverted palace. Um, I forget what it's called, but it's where you start to have to use the um, the statue links, right? You play a certain song that creates little clones that you can move around as little pedestals, um, almost like weights or blocks. And yeah, at a certain point, the whole dungeon inverts itself, right? So I think yeah, there's almost like the way that this game throughout has been reflecting back on and alluding to previous games. it's almost like when it does it here, instead of it being playful, interesting, self-conscious, it's it's showing like how little, if any, it has progressed from those games, right? It's not rising to the level of a game that was made much earlier on much inferior hardware, right? And maybe I don't know, like maybe that is part of Sakaguchi's swan song here is to be like, look, um, bigger is not better. Look back at these previous games, not just to see the ways in which we've progressed, but to see the ways in which we haven't, to see some things that we have maybe lost along the way, right? Or not been able, we haven't been able to iterate on successfully. And particularly the character of Amarant, when you stack him up against sort of comparable characters in previous games, he's not looking very good in that comparison. And so I mean, it's kind of interesting that these are these mirrors here, right? They are this object that is reflective. They're objects from another world, right? They are the seal that prevents people from passing between the two worlds, or at least from going that direction. People have come from Terra, but no one's gone back yet. Um, and so breaking the seal involves picking up these mirrors, going to the places that they are positioned upon in the world, and facing the guardians of those places. Um, but also, as players reflecting on the history of the series, the kinds of tropes and characters and things that have been iterated throughout the series. And I think, yeah, inevitably feeling like this game comes up a little bit short by those direct comparisons at least. Um, and maybe that's okay, right? Because those games are still there to play uh, for now. I don't know. As hardware ages, maybe that becomes tougher, but we'll see.
That's interesting because what you're making me think is that thematically, because this is a well done thematic moment, like I mentioned earlier, the fact that the inverted that the inversion of the structure is mentioned and that one does find earlier weapons in there, it does seem to suggest the mechanic in the battle mechanic, if one's really thinking. But I wonder if this is sort of like a return to the beginning, to the more primitive roots. And so now we're in an inverted castle. And in this inverted castle, we are returned to our original weapons. And so our characters are being sort of stripped down in some way to their earlier time, or they're being inverted in the same way that in a reflection, left and right are inverted. For example, there is an inversion in the return. There's an alteration in reflection,
Yeah.
as well as as well as like a psychoanalytic reintegration of something. But there's also a change in the representation itself. And so I wonder if going back to these simplistic four temples that are not very well developed in the same way that Amarant's not very well developed, this is a return to a simpler conceit, to a simpler iteration of Final Fantasy, almost as if, and I think this hypothesis will be very soon and validated, but perhaps not. Perhaps we're going to keep going to the roots, like of the Ifa tree, as it were, of the series as we get near the end. Now, there may also be like a Hayao Miyazaki development part problem, like with Spirited Away, when Jihiro leaves the bathhouse, how quickly the narrative progresses and sort of randomly towards the end there. There may be such a continuity problem because of real life problems, pragmatic problems, like having to finish this within a time frame, not having an elegant transition. These things, these creative elements don't come from nowhere. They have to be thought through and developed. And but maybe there is maybe what is conscious and is being shown to us is there's a return to the beginning, a conscious return to the
Yeah.
beginning. Not only do our characters return to their original weapons, and now we're returning to this like primordial or at least much earlier stage world, though it was actually more advanced than this current world we're on. It's way older, and going through these four elementals there's like archetypal principle level temples, right? They're like temples to the principles of the universe. I
Totally.
guess the elements of the universe in this case, right? They're causes, principles, and elements. Four causes, what, two principles and four elements, according to Aristotle. And I guess there's a fifth element too, ether. But in this, so yeah, so is this a conscious return to a simpler, more primitive or primordial archetype, like an earlier, like a Final Fantasy 3, 2, 1, or and is if it is that, is that even appropriate for, could the aim also be getting at the essence of what a Final Fantasy is rather than rehashing the past of it?
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. Like, in some ways, it is an interesting sequence because we see the characters interacting in a way that is pretty much unique in the game and maybe in the series as well, like having four simultaneous missions going on, right? And they choose more or less themselves. It's not something that the player has choice over, I guess is a way of saying it, right? Um, Zidane decides right away that he's going to go with Quina, which is kind of an interesting choice. Maybe it would have made more sense if he balanced this out a little bit more. Um, but it seems like it's maybe an attempt to get the player to like try to learn a little bit more of blue magic spells, like go
Yeah.
and eat some things with Quina, right? So they sort of mention that a few times. Um, and so Quina is like kind of a wild card, like could be very powerful if you've been doing that and learning a lot of things, could be very weak if you've been avoiding using this person. Um, and then the other teams are not that balanced because you've got like two of the heaviest hitters in Steiner and Vivi who go together, seemingly because Steiner is like heavy enough to keep Vivi from getting blown away in the tornado,
Yeah.
right? And they're buddies and they do like the magic sword attack together. And
Yes.
so that's cool. Like they've been core members from the beginning. Um, you know, Amarant and Freya, they're kind of like the most aloof, in a way, the least of the characters. They have had the fewest opportunities to be like the focus in a way, maybe aside from Quina. But so they together and they're both sort of like fiery, which makes sense. They would go in the volcano, I guess, um, and passionate. And then there's like maybe the most imbalanced group of any, which is the two sorceresses, Aiko, Dagger, the summoners. It makes like it's a terrible idea to put them together because they're alike, right? They don't balance one another in any way. Um, but it doesn't matter because we don't even see their combat at all. Like whatever the water guardian is, apparently they just handle it. And Aiko wants to go with Dagger talk. And again, it's like very strange that it's this 6-year-old trying to inst this kind of conversation, whereas Dagger is kind of like befuddled, like what could she possibly mean? And as they're leaving, she asks, "Do you love Zidane?" And Dagger pauses, is silent, maybe murmurs something as they're leaving, but it's not something that we can overhear. And then they just move on, right? But the question has been asked outright. Aiko's been waiting to do this, it seems like. Um, so yeah, so potentially kind of a cool sequence, but in terms of the gameplay, extremely lacking. In terms of the haste with which it's dispatched. Again, it's a little bit like just kind of tossed off. I don't know. So yeah, so I like the idea that we are in a way going back to the beginning. Um, but on the other hand, uh, I don't know that there's much substance, in this. It's kind of just uh, hastily um, cobbled together sequence that is finished just as quickly.
Well, it's interesting. So, speaking of duplications and reflections, and thinking about the original sort of photography and the so-called daguerreotype, I made my way sort of by accident going between the temples. I've still got to go to the fourth temple and fight the boss with Zidane. But what I
Hmm.
did instead of that is I went to so-called Sacro Bless Island, which one can now go to, where there's the city of Daguerreo, Daguerreo.
Like
And
the photographer, right?
yeah,
Daguerreo.
except
Yeah.
for yeah, with an extra E, I guess. But like, it's this city of scholars which worships the dragon god and which has
Mhm.
a series of levers. Have you been there yet?
Oh yeah.
During this play? Okay, good. Okay, and I did get a chance to go there, and I'm meeting characters from the past, like a character from Clara who wants to be part of the solution there, and then also somebody that looks like Red Mage, and then some excellent weapon smiths and a synthesis and a synthesist as well, who I got a very nice weapon for Zidane for 12,000 large. Um, but so it's interesting also seeing like not only the duplication of a tornado. I thought we were going to go to Clayro where the tornado used to be, right? When we got the hint from the Earth mirror that there's an you know, somewhere with some winds. But here now we have like an actual reference to something which is representative in nature, a Daguerreo type, and it brings together lots of different people who study books from different areas of the the world, and there are scientists there. There aren't just, say, holy figures like we saw last time with the bishop and have seen along the way. These are more like tots people. But
Yeah.
they exist at a place called Sacro Bless, like Sacred Blessed Island, a little bit like
Mhm.
Final Fantasy VIII's island closest to hell, island closest to heaven, with these Christian religious or Judeo-Christian religious themes. Um, but Sacro Blessed Island, which is so remote, or is where scholars convene, and but they study the river, or they claim fealty to the river dragon, the dragon god.
Yes. Yes. I mean, we've kind of encountered the dragon god already, right? Leviathan was there sealed by the Aoife tree. So it's kind of strange that Leviathan also seems to be over here. But maybe it's a kind of Midgard serpent kind of deal, like it encircles the world in some way. I'm not really sure. Um, but it's a very beautiful location. It's,
Yes,
under a waterfall
like the
with a
Zora's area
yeah,
from
it is.
Ocarina of
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah. And yet it's in some disrepair. Like it looks kind of like the bottom floor has been flooded, or the books are like laying there in the water. Like it's not really being taken care of. It's not clear if there's anyone really in charge of this place.
Right.
Maybe the god himself, themself is when it manifests. Um, but yeah, like you said, the weapons dealers, the synth shop, stuff here is powerful, but also quite expensive. So it required, from me at least, a little bit of you know going and selling stuff and trying to wheel and deal a little bit to be able to afford some of the items that are on sale here. Because with the synth mechanic, you have to like have two things that you pay to have put into one, so you are pretty quickly depleting your money.
Which you may
Um,
have bought there. So, like, yeah, what I
yeah.
bought there, you could buy the two weapons that you needed to for $6,000 and $8,000, and then for an additional 12,000, fuse them together.
Yes.
They've
Yes.
got a good racket going there.
It's well, but the thing is, there's a very well-known um, kind of, I don't know if it's a glitch or just a thing that the player can exploit, where if you synth cotton robes at the price of 1,000 gil plus the cost of the two materials, which I think are very, very cheap, um, then you can sell them for 2,000. So you can effectively double your money
Uh,
every time you go to a synth shop if you've done a little bit of prep. And so if you're ever low on money, go and buy the wrist item. It's only for sale in, like, I think Dali. It's like one of the
okay.
very first locations. And then buy the steepled hats. And the steepled hats, I think, are on sale in a number of places, but probably the easiest to reach at this stage of the game is the Black Mage Village. And the Black Mage Village also has a synth shop there. So you bring your wrists, you buy your steepled hats, you go to the synth shop, you synth them together, get your cotton robes, sell them, go back, do this again and again. And so this is a way to make money to buy stuff like at Trino's auction house, right? Things that are really expensive there. Or yeah, in Daguerreo, where stuff is pricey. Um, so I mean, it's like, of course, you're um, getting out more than you put in, right? But in order to do that, you aren't putting in just the objects and the money, you're putting in the time, right? It is a bit of a process. Um, Now, you got that for free, right? Your time is at your disposal. You're playing the game anyway, so presumably you have some free time. But I mean, in a as I was doing this to try to make money, I was fighting some of those big dragons and taking them out with level 5 death. I was kind of like just I don't know, your mind just kind of wanders because it's just a little bit grindy, right? And the kinds of thoughts that you have as you're doing those things, I guess I guess are kind of like what it might be to study the books in Daguerreo or something, right? It's just this kind of meditative. Um, it's not very stressful. You're kind of off to the side of the main action. You're just doing this thing, which is, not unpleasant. And 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 it is helpful. It
Enriching
is,
in a way in the world.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Like there isn't a real side quest here. There's not really a clear reason for this place to exist, right? As you say, people have come here from all over and have sort of just washed up. So in that way, it reminds me a little bit of like a Fisherman's Horizon
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
feel. Um, but yeah, yeah. Again, it's one of these cases where you can feel the ways in which this is evoking lots of things, and yet it's kind of like, yeah, but shouldn't there be something more to this? Um, so yeah,
You're
yeah,
right. It's forgettable. It lacks essence. It's pale again, and like
yeah,
in being an agglomeration, it lacks its own individuated spirit. It's not like
yeah,
Bitgar or like Bugenhagen, like these characters or these places that are so
yeah.
identifiable by having their own essential characteristics. It's like you can almost smell Midgar. I wonder what Mako would
Yeah,
smell like.
totally. Wait,
But
wait, wait. There is the character who reappears like a lot, the man with the four arms. Remember
yes,
from
the
Trino?
four, yeah, Goro slash, yeah,
He seems to be a Gilgamesh
yes,
insert, right? Because he's interested in treasure hunting,
yes.
right, and finding powerful swords.
What rank did he give to you? What
I think I'm a D ranked treasure hunter still because
well
I've
done.
done very little
I'm
chocobo
H,
race stuff.
so he said don't even talk to me.
Well, if you do a lot of chocobo digging, I think that's how you can
Okay.
improve your rank. So if you care about that sort of thing,
Yeah,
but
he's an impressive four-armed man, and so but you're right. So there would seem to be a crisis at this point in the game. It's been so well developed, and we went from not being very engaged in the beginning, but thinking we would be, to them realizing that the game's pretty brilliant, particularly when it focused on Dagger and Vivi heavily and their existential crises and their personal development. It's really been a story about them. But now, when we have a refocusing, now moving on to like Quina and Amarant and even Aiko and Zidane, they're much weaker, less developed characters than Dagger and Vivi, who are really real focal points and have been the focal points of the development in the story. And so you're really drawing my mind to the fact that, like with a poorly balanced team, the development of the characters has been poorly balanced, and it's not made up for through really narratively driven side quests like you might find in Chrono Trigger, with specific side quests to teach you more about each character, but also specifically Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy VII, where you find two of the extra characters through side quests that teach you about them, and then have additional side quests like when Yuffie steals all your damn materia. Um, and then of course Vincent eventually gets a game about him. This is how provocative these characters
oh, people
are.
love these side characters.
But
Yeah.
but right, these side characters, but these characters, when they're carrying the burden of the narrative, it gets flat. The drink
Mhm.
has been in the Coca-Cola has been in the refrigerator for a day, popped. And so even the writers seem to like lose creativity and to just resort to past tropes when trying to express what possible contribution these characters could make. And I think Aiko again is much more provocative than Amarant, but she's 6 years old. So it's sort of inappropriate things that she's constantly talking about with Garnet, and she's being used just as a foil for Garnet and her relationship to Zidane, right? Like
Yeah.
she is like a dueña, except for instead of being an old woman go between, she's like a young one.
Hmm.
Like you see in the Dolores Dueñas and the description Cervantes has in Don Quixote of dueñas, as sort of Pandaruses, as panderers, as it were. But right, so I think the game is uneven, is what we're getting at, in that it does hit tremendous depths, and it does have an ethos of wrapping things back together and being also a return to that which gamers liked prior to Final Fantasy 6, 7, and 8, the more medieval feel. But in so doing, certain characters have been painted in more vivid ways than others and are far more provocative and developed. And so now in this odd section, we don't care that much about Kuja, nor do we know why we should. We will eventually, right near the end, find out what is interesting about him, but we don't know it yet, except for he's sort of interesting and likes to talk and likes opulent things.
So,
Like,
I
yeah,
mean, yeah, there's this, yeah, sort of side area that you can find. You can do stuff with chocobos if you want to, but it takes a ton of time. I don't feel like it's that worth it. Um, yeah, but as far as like the thrust of the narrative, what's going on with Kuja, what's going on with Zidane and Garnet, right? This comes to a head where Amarant kind of asks, like a lot like Aiko asks Garnet there, like, do you love him? When you get back on the airship, Amarant's going to ask you, why are you doing all this, right? Because he's still on this kick of like, what motivates, what gives this person this power that I can't seem uh, to reach, and so the player actually does have the choice at this point to choose either I do it all for Dagger. I think that's the top choice, and then the other option is something like I want to find out what Kuja's up to or something like
that's
that.
obviously not really Zidane's plan because you know how unreflective he is, but
And
also how motivated to get girls he is.
yeah, like so I think you're right. Like I think the honest answer for that character is the top choice. Um, the um, the upshot of that conversation though is okay, we've done the thing, we've broken the seal, now we're in another world, right? So again, not a restart beginning over at the beginning type of thing, but in a way a whole read of the location, the step into through this shimmering aisle. I think at this point, a lot of things are going to be closed off. Certain locations and certain items and certain things can only be done before you go and cross that boundary. So I don't know exactly what those things are, um, but oh, you can also I think you can also just say I don't know why I'm doing everything. Um, yeah. Anyway, I was trying to find if they had the other odds listed out there. I don't know how different the responses that Amarant gives you are based on what you use there. Um, but yeah, stuff like finding um, bookable options, I think that's still going to be possible after we go across to Terra. But other things, uh, side quests might be kind of, yeah, like uh, sealed. So yeah, breaking one kind of seal and reestablishing another one. Hmm.
and finding ourselves at another point of no return with a perpetual meteor in the sky
Yeah.
or time compressed reality where maybe we can find our airship if we go through the right doorway along a bridge and then take a very, very convoluted path to find it. But yes, it looks like somehow, some way, we found our way near
Yeah.
the end game. And it may be time for us to have to make another hard choice again as we find ourselves again uh, at the end of one journey, but at the beginning of another. Out of one bound, but into another boundary.
I mean, I feel like FF Tactics is the way to go here. Um, Before going on to 10, kind of complete the Final Fantasies on PlayStation, cohort. I think we got to do Tactics first. That's my
Okay, okay, a strong position and a tough game, tactics, and a fairly long
again
game.
a time sink, massive time commitment.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm in this till I die, as far as I'm concerned, and so time is only relevant to the people that end up listening to this and how much of this they get. But the experience of doing it will be, you know, whether it's 20 hours on that or 100, well, it's all the same to me, insofar as as I am doing it, irrespective of what we achieve.
Yeah.
Uh,
Dude,
but
I find that game to be one of the more interesting variations on the formula of Final
okay,
Fantasy as
okay.
well. So
And it is
yeah.
itself an interesting adaptation because I know we both have the same new, really definitive adaptation, and that has been something people have commented on. And I think the consensus perspective
Mm,
from fans and critics has been that this is the best. These Chronicles of Ivalice are the best,
yeah.
tightest, least buggy version of Final Fantasy Tactics. And so, like the claim you were making potentially about Final Fantasy VII Remake, integrate on the PS5 or the Switch 2 or the Xbox Series S, Series X, um, there there is a pretension for towards definitive edition, or even with the Kingdom Hearts games in this version, and so it should be, as polished and cool as the game can possibly be. And it was a gap in my knowledge from
Mhm.
playing earlier. I think I played it as a greatest hits. Did it come with another game at some point, like the Final Fantasy fours and fives? And no, I think
Oh, I
yeah,
don't know if that was so different.
I think Final Fantasy 4 and 5 came together. I think Final Fantasy 6 and Chrono Trigger might have come together.
Mhm.
And maybe Tactics just came as a greatest hits. I seem to recall the 4 or 5 horsemen riding towards one on the cover of the original disc,
Yeah.
something like that. Um,
By horsemen, you mean chocobo riders, of
Are they
course. Yeah.
Chocobo Riders? This makes much more sense. That's much more on brand, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, well, there's that Mandela effect. Were they Chocobos? No, I'm just kidding. Berenstain Bears? And yeah. Well, okay, my friend, this has been a wonderful weekend. And as you know, when I'm not talking or prepping for this, I'm doing a lot of other stuff. And so back to the other real world, which is itself questionably real when considering notions of real versus virtual. Not to mention the fact that in my scholarly life, the word comes from scola, which means school, but originally meant leisure. And so,
Mhm.
just a deep irony to the notion that for how hard I'm working and the fact that I even think that it's called work.
Yeah.
Uh, well, uh, and yet something will be done. And so, physically speaking, it's work enough. All right. Well, my friend, it's been wonderful talking to you, and I am looking forward to talking with you and Daniel Babcock, recently removed, having his meniscus removed, about
Mm.
Ada or Ardor, not Pale Fire, as I mistakenly said last time, later this week.
Sounds good. Okay. Thanks again.
Thank you, my friend. See ya.
Take it easy.